We live on a continent which, to a certain extent, has been divided up in a very artificial way. So the borders or the boundaries that we call our nationhoods are not necessarily aligned to the geographical or the cultural inheritances of the people who live there. From a cultural point of view, following that, we find that there's this cultural invasion into our continent, and all the seminal objects are actually taken away, and they land up being in the British Museum, or the Louvre, or the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., or somewhere else. So we land up with a situation where our land is not defined by ourselves. The cultural artifacts that define us as a people are not on our continent. So what is it that we actually do about how we communicate or permeate the world with our narrative, with our history? So what devices have we used from a cultural point of view in Africa? We've used donor dependency. You know, let's get a lot of pop musicians together and let's sing for food and money to send to Africa, because clearly Africa can't look after itself. Or let's perhaps sell a very, very old concept where we all run around with skins and masks and beat on drums. Now, you might think, God damn, this guy's ridiculous. But the reality is that we've all chosen to export ideas of our continent and ourselves. Those ideas have been very based on outcomes, which have sometimes nothing to do with the way that we communicate in. When you run cultural or aid organizations, it's really, really important that you get financial support. So you sell a certain idea of your need. The problem is that you might land up with a narrative which is so separate from the reality that's been lived that it becomes like a kind of a parallel universe. How do we begin to write stories or narratives about ourselves which are closer to our vision of who we are? How do we begin to tell and share those stories honestly so that we don't land up with another fixed idea of who we are? And my question is, how much longer do we perpetrate or perpetuate, and I use the word perpetrate as well, because it's a kind of a crime against ourselves to assimilate the way that the world sees us and then sell it back to them. I mean, it's smart, it keeps our industry sustainable, but I'm not sure how close it is to the stories that we want to tell. So, as I thought further about why we're all here today, I thought to myself, well, what mechanisms are there in the world that help humans to make sense of why we're here, why we're in this place, and what is our role in this time? So we look at politics. I needn't speak about the way that politics has become a highly divisive thing. It's no longer able to join us together, as my colleague said earlier, into one voice, one vision, one nation. Then I thought about religion and the whole Judeo-Christian-Muslim divide that's developing in the world. Religion itself doesn't seem to be able to offer us many viable solutions. So then I started to think about culture. Now, I've attended many of these conferences where I've been sitting in the audience and they talk about the new luxury, about authenticity, about uniqueness, about telling the story of where the visitors come, and doing that in an honest way, so it's not just the jungle, the drums, and the mosque. But that's a very tough thing to do, because in doing that, we have to go counter to everything that we understand works. We know how to do this really well in Africa. We know how to sell concepts of ourselves, as I said, for these other outcomes. So when I'm not sure which way to go, I always find that it's better to depend on other people's knowledge. So the process that I use is culture. And what I do is I actually just visit artist studios and I listen to the narratives that they're telling. These are individuals who have nothing to lose. And they tell the narratives of the place where they are. And in doing that, they open my eyes to the pressing criteria, the issues of living right now. So what I thought I'll do is I'm just going to go through a number of images to give you a little taste of what really contemporary cutting-edge artists are doing in Africa right now. And then the project that I'm working on, which is going to form a home for this practice and become, I think, a huge symbol for all of us and for you to perhaps tell another narrative of Africa. A narrative of Africa which is not easy, which is confrontational, which is disturbing, but which is also celebratory, specific, individualistic, eccentric, etc. I had a group of young kids who were skateboarding outside our little cultural space, and they were messing up the chairs and whatever. And I went outside and I said to them, "Hey guys, you're fucking up my chairs." So they said, So I said, "I'll make a deal with you. There's art inside. Put your skateboards down, you look for 10 minutes, you can go outside and fuck up my chairs." And it was kind of weird for them because, and I said, and there's free internet if you want to download some porn so your parents don't know. And oh my God, this is a really cool place. So after they had spent 10 minutes, I thought they'd be outside on the skateboards again. What they were interested in was looking at this crazy, weird stuff inside. And the one kid said to me, "What is a museum?" And I said, "Well, what do you think it is?" Again, I always just rely on other people's knowledge. So he said to me, "Well, I really like the space. I'd love to live here. Our little space is at the waterfront with the best views, 360-degree view of the yacht basin. So I'd really like to live here. I could have cool parties." And I said, "And what's inside?" And he said, "It's really difficult." So I said, "So what's an art museum?" And he said, "It's a safe space where we can deal with difficult issues." And I think that if each of us, in our way, the narratives that we tell of Africa, could almost take that approach and say, we'll create a safe space, a luxurious space, a space of enjoyment, pleasure, decadence, whatever it is that we all do, but then not necessarily tell the stories that we think people want, because I think people who are on a certain level of life experience actually want that, and for want of another word, that authentic insight into where they are, what's happening there, and what the issues and the challenges of being there at that place are. So this is Nandipha Mantambo. She's an artist from Swaziland, and she looks at European myths and mythology. This is the story of Narcissus, seduced by his own, but here her own reflection. You can see she takes on the role of the matador and the bull at the same time. You'll see in images that come up. So instead of saying, "I'm looking for an authenticity of Africa, something that is specifically me," she says, "Listen, we have a history of Africa intertwined with Europe, which is very problematic. Let me just take it all and find a way to use all of that and bring it together." These are extraordinary objects because what they do is they say, we're going to take account of traditions of performance art, conceptual art, which all originated in Europe. Appropriate it, steal it, but make it our own. The first time that Africa ever won the Golden Lion was won by the Angolan Pavilion. And this is the piece. We will recreate it here in Cape Town in 3 years' time. So part of the strategy that we're doing with this cultural organization is to say, if there's been this tradition of outside countries taking cultural heritage, why don't we come up with a strategy where we can buy it, and we can return it to Africa, and we can preserve it here. So if people are interested, they have to actually get on a plane, make a commitment, and come here to see who we are. Now, what does that do? It empowers our artists. It creates industry. It creates jobs. It creates wealth, both financial and cultural wealth. And it says something about us, too. It says, we believe enough in ourselves to invest huge amounts of money in edifices, in infrastructures, in institutions to protect the legacy of who we are. Michaela Mattison, who represented Zimbabwe at the last Venice Biennale, he burned down a forest. He took the ash from the forest, cast the blocks, the stumps of the trees, mixed them with glue, reconstituted the pieces into a forest made of the ash of a destroyed forest. So you'll see a lot of the artists that we'll look at dealing with identity, environmental issues, hunger, food. Coetzee Chirai. This is an interesting piece, you know. I worked with Janes to put some work up at their property in Kenya. And we commissioned a large land art piece. We commissioned massive woven sculptures which refer to traditional weaving. And then we bought this piece, which is a depiction of the Last Supper, but a version of Africa. It's a 2-minute video that's been stretched for 15 minutes. So it moves so slowly that it actually looks like a fresco, like a painting. And in the process, you realize, oh my God, it's actually moving. And if you sit there long enough, you'll see the characters shooting each other, attacking each other, being violent. It's not a nice representation of our continent. But this is the piece that every visitor to this luxury lodge is interested in. Because what it does is it doesn't try to avoid the narrative or the reality of where we live, but it does it in a way which is creative, evocative, and engaging enough, taking something, a narrative that they know, a European visitor, everybody knows the Last Supper, and then they do it in a way which kind of helps to transcribe a narrative over. You know, and I think that it's these kind of risks which I think are a new kind of luxury, where we can offer to visitors, to museums, to lodges, to cultural institutions, wherever, instead of having this easy, safe stuff, we can offer stuff where we say, we're aware of what we are, we're aware of what's happening, and we're making attempts to deal with it. And we'd also like you to engage with that ongoing discourse. Andrew Putter, fascinating work. Before the European settling or colonialization of southern Africa, ships would sink off the coast, and most of the white people were drowned or didn't survive. A few of them were assimilated into local tribes, and he recreates from our anthropological collections how these people might have looked. And I think it's a very beautiful body of work, because what it does, it says, what would have happened if we had been friends and not enemies? What would have happened if a colonial history perhaps had brought something that was a melting pot, which was a kind of a cosmopolitan mixture of culture, as opposed to a kind of exploitation and exploited. One of the big issues in representation in Africa has to do with the diorama. I'm sure that you've all been to museums where you've seen these stuffed animals and sometimes even indigenous people, you know, making a fire with a little bow and arrow. And we all know from a cultural point of view, it's highly problematic to put white people's culture in an art museum and black people's culture in a natural history museum. Again, our artists are not interested in having a political fight about that. What they say is, well, we'll appropriate that problematic, we'll make it our own, we'll laugh at it, we'll be sarcastic, we'll play with it, and in the process we'll disempower it, and we'll make it our own and liberate ourselves from it. So what I really love about what I'm seeing the artists do, they're not dividing, they're actually saying, let me take this cultural inheritance and do something with it, and in the process, celebrate all the parts, problematic or not, which brought this kind of work into being. Zanella Mohali, what we're looking at, this is a piece, when I show it, that people are deeply, deeply moved by the classical photographs of these heroic women. But in fact, what you're looking at are women who've all suffered corrective rape. So in our country, in South Africa, if a woman is a lesbian, the men take her and they actually teach her how to be a real woman. I'm sure it works, huh? But she creates these incredible, monumental, celebratory photographs. So again, art has the ability to bring together, to unify, to help people to understand each other. And I think that, you know, considering the xenophobic situations that we had just recently, we have to find something in many of our countries in Africa to understand each other, to understand each other's differences, to understand each other's cultures. Because if we don't understand the differences, we have violence, we have fear, we have misunderstanding. And perhaps culture is one of our last hopes, let's say. So I think that when we engage with culture, whether it's a painting in a guest room, whether it's a photograph in a museum, it's not just merely decoration. It's our participation and our ability to really use tools to help a large group of people to understand possibilities beyond just the one Africa we sell, which is destitution and poverty, and the other Africa that we sell, which is luxury and lodges and every whim catered to. Now, I don't normally talk about this, but I think here it's important because all of us that are in the room, we mustn't underestimate the power of culture to create wealth. Each of these individuals, we expect about 160 museum groups from around the world to visit the museum every year. Each group is between 50 and 60 people. MoMA, Guggenheim, Whitney, Pompidou, the list goes on and on. These are the trustees who give the finances to keep these museums open. So that means these are high-net individuals who come to see this museum, but then want to eat at the best restaurants, stay at the best lodges, go on the best game drives, have the best tour guides. So by creating an investment in a piece like this, and if I tell you the price, you'll shudder. It's hugely expensive. It's hugely demanding for us to engage with this. But the spin-off for all the industries and yours as well around things like this is enormous in comparison to the literally small investment that we have to make. The museum will be Pan-African in focus, so it will represent all 54 countries of Africa, as well as the diaspora. So we see ourselves in this 9-story institution representing many, many different cultures, many, many different kinds of traditions from across the continent. There'll be a permanent collection of 2 floors, which will be highly educational in focus, which will be hung so that people can come and see a chronological development of art. And then we will also host exhibitions from around the world. So the big blockbusters that you see in museums elsewhere, we are going to be sending shows to them. We already have a show that's going to the Guggenheim, to the Vitro Design Museum, to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Barcelona, and then their shows will come to us. It'll also give us an opportunity to share with our local art students, designers, etc., what's happening elsewhere in the world. That's a cut-through of what the museum will look like. We've worked very hard to make sure that the museum fulfills a function as an art institution. It fulfills a function to tell a story of Africa written by Africans, for Africans, from Africa. And I think that what this institution is going to do, based on the kinds of people that we expect to come, yes, it's the man in the street who loves art, but also it's the high-end net worth traveler who's going to come in organized groups. And I think that what the museum is going to do is it's actually going to raise the standards for art practice in Africa, because our visitors are going to start saying, you know what, we're no longer satisfied looking at drums that were bought on a town square decorating our hotel. We want the best food, we want the best beds, we want the best service, and we want the best cultural representation. Because when I leave this continent, I want to be sure that I have a complete understanding of what is valuable to the people who live there, what it means to be African. And those visitors want to also taste, in a way, that authentic knowledge of those people, as opposed to some kind of pre-packaged, canned good vision of what Africa is.